I'm Brenna, 27 years old, living in the beautiful city of Toledo, Ohio. I am confident that I have an eye-catching appearance with long black hair and a perfect figure. Even though I get a lot of attention, I haven't had a happy relationship yet. My best friend, Anna, introduced me to the blind date. That was Anna's senior at university. I was also quite comfortable with this, so I agreed. If I can't become a couple, maybe I can have another friend. The blind date took place on Friday night. He invited me to the luxurious restaurant, the Beirut. When I arrived, an extremely handsome guy sitting near the window waved at me. The closer I got, the faster my heart beat. He's actually much more handsome than in the photo. He introduced himself as Vincent, 29 years old. We started eating and chatting.
Vincent is truly attractive, not only because of his appearance, but also because of his charming way of speaking and solid career.
Vincent said he had a private hospital specializing in the beauty industry. I also feel that Vincent likes me quite a bit. The blind date went very happily. Vincent took me home at 11 o'clock. We exchanged contacts and set up another date. When I got back to my room, I happily picked up my phone and texted Anna about the blind date. But Anna didn't answer. I guess she was asleep. Vincent and I's next few dates were great. I accepted to be his girlfriend after the 5th date. Vincent kept complimenting my hair and hands. He said they were beautiful and made an impression from the first time he saw me. Every appointment, I texted Anna the details, but she didn't reply. I'm not worried or strange, because her job often requires her to travel and disconnect for a few days. I plan to meet Anna to thank her when she returns. One evening, after Vincent and I had finished eating, he gave me a very large and beautiful bouquet of roses. Vincent wanted to invite me to his house and said he'd prepared a surprise gift for me. I agreed without thinking too much. Vincent's house is very large and modern. He led me to a room on the 2nd floor. Vincent told me to wait here for a moment. He would come back with a surprise prepared. I hugged a bouquet of roses, feeling so lucky and happy to have found a very good boyfriend. I looked around and saw that the room was quite simple, with a lovely table and chairs, a wooden cabinet in the left corner. It would be a surprise later. I smelled an antibiotic-like smell, but with the added unpleasantness of an animal carcass. I didn't pay too much attention because those two smells were only fleeting. A few minutes later, I wanted to use the restroom. Going around the observation room, I saw the toilet in the right corner. Going inside, I saw yellow hair on the floor, sink, and bathtub. There weren't many of them, but they were still prominent enough for me to see. The hair is long. I'm sure this is a woman's hair. Maybe, in this house, there are relatives living with him. I plan to ask Vincent after he returns. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting my makeup. At the bottom of the mirror, there was a dim red light. I raised my hand to see what it was. Accidentally, I pulled up the mirror. Behind were many medical instruments. I was quite surprised, but remembering Vincent's job as a doctor, I also found the answer. I no longer wonder about the existence, but rather wonder about their location. I closed the mirror and went outside to wait for Vincent. After a while, Vincent still didn't come back. I started to lose patience. I planned to go out and look for him. The house was very large and had many rooms. I walked down the hallway and called Vincent. He didn't answer. I started to feel strange and scared. This case is very similar to the movies I've seen. I will play the main character and be in danger. While thinking about that, Vincent suddenly called out loudly, startling me. He was worried when he didn't see me in the room. Vincent gently raised his hand to his cheek and looked at me. A strange feeling appeared. I slowly closed my eyes. I will give you long black hair like before, a lovely and soft hand. I will collect beautiful body parts that resemble you. You will be perfected soon, Natalie. I woke up dreamily, realizing I was lying in bed, the light from the lamp shining straight into my face, making me dizzy. I just heard Vincent's voice. He mentioned something about Natalie. I heard loud, scary laughter and footsteps getting further and further away. He must have gone out. I used all my strength to sit up. trying to stay awake and observe my surroundings. I was in the room at the beginning, surrounded by a lot more medical equipment. Looking to the left, I was startled and covered my mouth with my hand to keep from screaming. It was a woman, but it wasn't right because she didn't have hands, hair, or ears. Or it's a mannequin, but the stitches to attach to the body parts are very clear. I panicked and sat close to the corner of the bed. Looking at my arms, there are many marks. My scalp was also completely numb. I trembled and got out of bed, trying to run away from here as quickly as possible. My head couldn't deduce anything about Vincent anymore. I just want to escape quickly, get out of this evil house and find help. While scared and confused, I accidentally bumped into the cabinet near the door. The closet door opened and 2 women fell to the floor from inside. Each of them is missing some part of their body. The fear was so extreme that I couldn't control my body anymore. I stood there looking at the 2 women and realized one of them is my best friend Anna. Her beautiful blue eyes were sewn shut. The stitches are infected and smell terrible. Anna was still breathing. She was still alive. I helped her up when suddenly I heard footsteps coming closer and closer from outside. I'm Lonnie, 18 years old, the only daughter in the family. My family lives in the town of Atherton, California. The name Lonnie that I have also reflects the love that everyone has for me. Since I was little, I have always been described as a healthy, beautiful, and nice girl. Perhaps many people would think that I am so beautiful partly inherited from my parents. But no, my parents look very different. My father is much older than his age. I don't have any resemblance to my father. My mother has pale, sallow skin, a thin and lifeless body. The lines on my mother's face are very beautiful, but they are not well taken care of. I often see my mother sitting alone with a pale and tired face. I would run to hug her and ask if she was okay. Mom would always smile kindly, hug me tightly, and cry for a long time. I was educated by my parents, and especially my grandmother, to be a good girl and not putting my nose into other people's affairs. So I grew up in a cocoon of love and affection. I was carefree and obedient to adults. Even in situations I didn't like, I wouldn't resist or argue. Speaking of my grandmother, her name is Ira. My grandmother is very young and beautiful. Completely different from my mother. My grandmother has fair, smooth skin, a firm and attractive figure, even though she's almost 60 years old. I know my grandmother is a single mother. She has only one child, my father. I have never seen her mention any other relatives, and I also don't know anyone other than my father, mother, and grandmother. My grandmother's house is about a 30-minute drive from my house. My parents would take me to stay with her every weekend. My grandmother is very gentle. She teaches me to always love and take care of myself. Do not let any dirty marks appear on your skin because you will look very ugly. Your hair must always be fragrant and smooth. The clothes you wear must be the most beautiful and expensive. Do not eat food which origins are unknown. You must eat food prepared by your mother's own hands or prepared by me. Those are the things my grandmother always teaches me since I was little. Every weekend, staying with my grandmother made me very happy because I felt loved very much. One weekend, my parents took me to visit her. When she saw the small scratches on my nails, my grandmother got angry with my parents. On such occasions, I always saw my mother's face full of fear and panic. My mother dared not speak up. There's another strange thing. Every time my parents took me to visit my grandmother, my mother and grandmother would go into a separate room to talk. Dad and I would wait outside. I would look towards the door of my grandmother's room. It would be a long time before they came out. I would run to hug my mother again, every time I saw the fatigue and discomfort on her face. On my mother's hand, every time they came out of my grandmother's room, there would always be a plaster. My mother would try to shield it with her hand, but I always saw it. In the summer of the year I finished middle school, my grandmother said my parents should let me stay with her for a long time. During the days at my grandmother's house, I got to know a neighbor boy my age named Mike. Mike is kind and funny. We quickly became friends. One day, while playing with Mike, I accidentally slipped and fell. Mike quickly helped me up. Blood was flowing from my hand. I was worried that I would be scolded more than worrying about the wound. My grandmother suddenly appeared with a terrifying, angry face. She grabbed my hand, looked at the bleeding wound, took a deep breath. I thought she was trying to calm down. Mike, seeing my grandmother's angry face, stood frozen in fear. Both Mike and I seemed unable to breathe, staring intently at my grandmother. My grandmother held my hand, slowly led me closer to Mike. Then, my grandmother looked at me, looked at the wound on my hand, then turned to look at Mike. Very quickly, strongly, and decisively, my grandmother slapped Mike hard. She shouted loudly, demanding that Mike stay away from me forever. I looked at Mike, feeling guilty for my friend, but I didn't dare to speak up for him. I just bowed my head and remained silent, because I was very scared. My grandmother took me home. I always had to prepare mentally for her punishment. But grandmother gently sat down beside me, lifted my injured arm to observe. Then, my grandmother kissed the wound. I looked at her in surprise. My blood was smeared all over my grandmother's mouth. She looked at me, smiling kindly as usual, but mysteriously and frighteningly. She said she would help me bandage the wound and then lick the blood on her mouth, an expression of satisfaction. I was very scared. My emotions were chaotic. I sat there motionless, afraid to speak up, just silent. The terrifying strictness and surveillance of my grandmother as I approached the age of 18, it made me suffocate. I began to notice my mother's aging more and more clearly and quickly, while my grandmother's beauty seemed to last forever. I was old enough to understand and wanted to find out about everything. My grandmother always remained silent in the face of my questions. One evening, when my family was having dinner with my grandmother, my mother suddenly collapsed on the dining table and fainted. I worriedly tried to wake my mother up while my father called for an ambulance. I felt chilled by the indifferent gaze and the faint smile on my grandmother's lips. My mother was diagnosed with severe anemia and passed away after being hospitalized for a day. I was completely devastated. I lost one of my 3 closest relatives too suddenly. My mother's funeral was as cold and fleeting as the way my mother left me. I had to take nearly a month off from school because my mental state was unstable. One day, I came home from school. Passing by my parents' room, I suddenly heard my grandmother's voice. I gently approached to listen. "She's almost 18. Quickly find another replacement and nurture her well. Our bodies only suit the cleanest and purest things." I looked through the crack in the door, horrified to see an old, ugly woman with red glowing eyes drinking a bowl of blood. Blood dripping down her chin and neck. That elderly face gradually rejuvenated. Her eyes returned to normal. It was my grandmother. The drops of blood fell to the floor, being licked clean by my father, who knelt down. The satisfaction on their faces, along with the maniacal laughter, completely destroyed me.